So welcome to OSRL's webinar entitled New Routes, New Risks, Oil Spill Response in the Arctic Circle. Before we kick off, I'm just going to go through a little bit of an agenda with you. So firstly, an introduction to all of the speakers you see on your screen before you, and a little bit about OSRL if you didn't already know. And then we're going to move on to the Arctic problem and what that is, oil spill response in the Arctic, and how OSRL is strategically positioned. And then we'll finish off with some questions. So without further ado, an introduction to the speakers. So I will hand you over to my colleague, Graham. Over to you, Graham.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Graham Jackson. I work as a responder for oil spill response in the response department. My background is as an operational firefighter for over 30 years, where I specialised in fast water rescue and high volume pumping. And as you can tell by my wrinkles, I add an element of operational experience to the department. I'll hand over to Guy.
Thanks, Graham. My name's Guy Fletcher. I'm a spill response specialist. My background was in the motor trade as a mechanic. So with my skills and backgrounds on engine stuff brings to the company with our equipment here in Power Packs. And I'll hand over to colleague James.
Thank you, Guy. And my name is James Thompson. I am a senior response specialist at the company. I've been to over a dozen international oil spills, ranging from South America and the Caribbean to Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, and have been in country lead for a number of those incidents. And my background is in oceanography and marine biology, and these has come in handy every now and then. So I will move on to an introduction to OSRL. For those of you who might not be aware, we are the largest international industry-funded and member-owned response cooperative, trusted by oil and gas and shipping industries, as well as governments across the globe. We provide resources to enable our members to prepare for and respond to oil spill incidents effectively and efficiently globally to mitigate the impact on communities and the environment. And our aim is to lead the way, applying good practice and continuous innovation to spill response, making sure we adapt and evolve to meet our members' needs as they navigate our changing world. And as part of this, we of course have a global presence. As you can see on the slides here, we have 4 main response bases dotted across the continents, from Fort Lauderdale, Southampton, Bahrain to Singapore. And as well as this, we have a number of regional offices and subsea well intervention service bases. So I will now move on to point number 1, the Arctic problem, and hand over to my colleague Guy. Guy, over to you.
Thanks, James. So the Arctic problem, why does the Arctic matter? As climate change is rapidly opening the region, reducing sea ice and increasing accessibility for the vessel traffic like tankers, LNG, cargo, and even tourism. So now it's open for this such gold rush. As the sea ice retreats, oil developments are expanding and shipping lanes which companies are salivating for access to their resources, meaning they can transport goods from Europe to Japan a lot quicker. And no other National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration notes that the Arctic is moving towards ice-free summers, but currently vessels still face unpredictable ice conditions, moving flows, and unstable ice dynamics. So as you can see with the environmental change on the slide back in September 1979, as you can see, it covers all of it. There's no access route through there. So as the Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the global average, declining the sea ice extent and thickness, which is also creating longer ice-free seasons, as you can see here in September 2024. This is then creating the shipping routes. So you've got your Northwest Passage and Northeast Passage, as you see with which are the Northern Sea routes. Again, these reducing transit times between Europe and Asia, saving over a week in some transits, also saving companies millions of pounds. The next slide you'll see is the Transpolar Sea Route. So this is a hypothetical shipping lane that runs through the central Arctic Ocean. But as Noah states, we are moving towards an ice-free summer. So it won't be long before this route is available. And as a direct route, it will become the shortest path from the Northern Atlantic and the Northern Pacific. Again, creating a further shortage, maybe saving a further 5 days on travel between Asia and Europe, compared to the Northwest and Northeast sea routes. Another interesting is the Arctic is becoming a zone of increasing strategic competition between the major powers. As the region contains significant untapped natural resources like oil, gas, minerals, China has also positioned itself as a near Arctic state with an economic and scientific interest. And then you've got the countries like Russia and US who are also expanding their presence and influence. Russia has also made the largest military investment in the Arctic, including bases and icebreakers. So Western nations are increasing focus on Arctic security and defence capabilities, which unfortunately governance and cooperation mechanisms in the Arctic are weakening, and the risk of miscalculation or conflict is increasing as competition intensifies. The next slide shows, obviously, since the shipping routes have opened up, as you can see on the left with the unique ships. The term unique ship refers to each ship only counting once, although many of the ships have entered the area multiple times each year. But as you can see, that's a 40% increase. Another interesting stat, between 2013 and 2025, the ship type that saw the greatest increase in the Arctic was crude oil tankers, which was a massive 396% increase over the 12 years. So more traffic equals increased probability of marine incidents and spills. I'm going to hand you back over to James now. We'll continue with the next.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Guy. So I'm just going to give an overview of what it's like conducting a response in the Arctic and some of the challenges that we face when operating in these conditions. So, like I said, more traffic means an increased probability of marine incidents and spills. And with this increased probability, it's crucial to know how these spills impact these cold regions. Low temperatures slow the natural degradation of oil, which means that oil persists much longer in the environment. And this can therefore lead to a protracted response. Additionally, these areas are highly ecologically sensitive with significant bird and marine mammal populations. And oil can disturb these unique ecosystems, destroy food sources, and ruin breeding grounds. And of course, accessibility issues occur in severe weather, which creates difficult cleanup conditions also. The cold weather can obviously impact both people, but also equipment. And to top it off, reputation-wise, I mean, dark oil on pristine white snow makes for a disturbing image. So it's useful to note that in these regions, there is greater long-term environmental impact versus temperate or hot weather regions. Now, cold environments have a pretty significant impact on oil behavior. As I said before, a decrease in oil degradation occurs, and this goes hand in hand with increased oil viscosity. And increased viscosity means thicker, less mobile oil. This also goes hand in hand with reduced evaporation and dispersion, which means that oil hangs around in these environments far longer. It can be hidden by snow as this falls into these various environments and remain trapped in that snow. Something called encapsulation can occur, where oil is then frozen into ice as that snow compacts or water forms into ice. We have something like under ice transport, where oil can either be flowing directly in the water column underneath the surface of the ice or on the surface of the water and underneath the ice. And as a result of this, oil can then become trapped in fissures or oil pools under the bottom of the ice or in ice rubble as well. So many things to consider. But as you can imagine, working in these regions can also come with plenty of challenges, not only on how we interact and recover the hydrocarbons, but on every other aspect of a response. So over these next few slides, I'm going to go through some of the ways in which these areas are impacted. So kicking off, we have access, and access to these polar regions in almost every case means that a response is hindered, not only in getting people into the area, but also equipment. Caution needs to be taken when working on sea, river, and freshwater ice, as falling through is always a potential. And with people falling through into water, they can suffer obvious hypothermia and other cold water issues. But equally, too much equipment on ice in an area can cause an entire area to fail and everything in that area to fall through, which is also significant risk. Attempting to access drilling operations in ice-locked areas can become difficult for vessels due to the number of icebergs present, and especially when trying to conduct offshore containment and recovery operations, icebergs and ice flows can hinder the deployment of booms and recovery devices, therefore restricting response effectiveness. Detection of oil can be both a blessing and a curse in Arctic environments. Much like in temperate regions, oil can sometimes be easily spotted, especially if it's on the surface of the ice. It's literally black and white, and you can see that in the image on the top there. But if oil is flowing under an ice floe or an ice sheet, there is absolutely zero chance of spotting it. And if you're presented with the image on the far left, I mean, there's no chance of finding any oil. As a result, more numerous or different methods of oil detection need to be employed. So, like with many responses, aerial surveillance is always an incredibly useful tool for oil detection. But the use of AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles, and ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, can be used to detect oil under the water surface and are very useful for inaccessible underwater areas. Using lights under the ice to contrast oil against the ice surface is very effective, especially if the rough location of oil is known. You can see that in the middle image there. But something as simple as sticking a camera on a pole and putting this under the ice through a hole is also very effective. And then, which is also very effective too, trained sniffer dogs or canine units have also been proven to be able to detect ice from miles away, oil in ice from miles away. When working in these areas, the amount of PPE required to keep responders warm and therefore functional is significant, which we will go on to later. But there are always unseen dangers. Hypothermia and frostbite are standard and ever present, and of course can be lethal. But also overheating, not drinking enough fluids, and not eating enough can take people by surprise too. The cold also limits the use of certain skimmers and recovery equipment. Like I said before, an increase in oil viscosity means that specific skimmers are required, such as mechanical skimmers that can deal with a much more viscous heavy oil. Ice also limits access to the oil, but can also impact the size of the skimmers that are being deployed in an area due to weight or awkwardness of the skimmer. And again, impact on pumps. So heated water or steam injection may be required if the oil is incredibly viscous and acting like a solid. And then just to finish off on there, the far right image is oil which is encapsulated in ice. So recovery can be very difficult. Now, the time of year that a spill occurs can significantly impact how a response is mounted. During the heart of winter in the Arctic Circle, there is almost no light and incredibly long hours of darkness. This reduced visibility means the time available to recover oil is reduced massively and a response is ineffective. However, on the flip side, if a spill occurs during the summer, we would have infinite light to work with, which is very useful. The image in the middle is midday in polar winter, and the image on the right is midnight in polar summer. So it kind of contrasts how different these times of year can be. And it's worthy to note that in autumn, as marine traffic starts to tail off, there is still a higher likelihood of incidents occurring as marine ice starts to form and encroaches on those shipping lanes. So if a spill were to occur during this time period, a response needs to be mounted quickly. Finally, some logistical challenges. As I mentioned briefly, logistics is always going to be an issue in these areas. Attempting to bring equipment into these areas, you can imagine, is met with significant distances, and especially on enormous ice flows, zero infrastructure. Everything that you need, you will have to bring with you, so nothing can be forgotten. And not only do you have to think about the equipment, but you also have to think about your responders in these areas. Food, accommodation, and welfare needs to be considered at all times, with warm tents for both the equipment and people being provided. And finally, when working in these areas, animal interactions have to be considered as well, because they can be potentially dangerous, especially if you're working in northern Greenland or northern Canada or Alaska. Something like polar bears might always be encountered, so lethal equipment or animal deterrent might be necessary. And finally, some additional response strategies. Dispersant can always be an effective option for difficult to reach areas. Along with all the other considerations one needs to take into account, like oil emulsion and time after release, some additional considerations must be made for releasing dispersant in the Arctic. This is predominantly access, B, permission, and then whether or not there is enough turbidity on the water's surface where dispersant is being proposed to be used to actually enable it to be effective. Something that can also be considered and has been used before is in situ burning, and now this can be used alongside herders. But again, it is a useful tool in the response arsenal, despite looking quite terrible. Brilliant. So this finishes off my section, and now I'm going to hand over to Graham. Graham, over to you.
Thank you, James. I'm just going to touch on how OSRL is strategically positioned. So I think we're positioned very well for our members. We're preempting the future of spills in these climates and regions. Firstly, our equipment, we've got specific equipment that we've identified, we've tried it and practically tested it in the cold weather conditions. So, and as James has said earlier on in his presentation, that this equipment is distributed globally in our bases through the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Asia. Secondly, it would be our training. We have specific expertise for our practical training and responses in these environments. That training is ongoing, and I will come on to our last training exercise we did in Norway at the beginning of this year in a little while. What's our global capability? If you cast your mind back to Guy's slide, it shows the countries located in and around the Arctic Circle. They have, by their proximity, an interest in all these shipping routes opening up and being very safe, as they're the ones that are really going to be impacted if it all goes horribly wrong. So consequently, they're really proactive in their response strategies and their preparedness in order to meet the eventuality of oil reaching land or indeed at sea. So currently we're collaborating with a number of stakeholders in the Arctic regions, and these include the Eastern Canada Response Corporation, the Greenland Oil Spill Response, the Norwegian Clean Seas Association, Alaska Clean Seas, and then on the other end of the planet, the British Antarctic Survey. Consequently, we've gained masses of experience, cold weather specific, and expertise exercising and responding in countries such as Greenland, Alaska, Canada, Kazakhstan, Norway, and multiple areas of Russia. And in particular, I'll bring attention to Sakhalin Island, which is just north of Japan. We had personnel on rotation for a number of years. They were resourcing equipment for warehouses along a 220-kilometre pipeline from Sakhalin to the Castry export terminal. We also delivered training exercises and preparedness work, including writing contingency plans alongside ExxonMobil. We've also carried out some practical and theory training with the British Antarctic Survey. That was done in the UK, but also we have had personnel visit the Rotorua Research Station in Antarctica, where we conducted oil spill exercises. We reviewed their SOPEPs, their shipboard oil pollution emergency plans, and their in-field incident and crisis management procedures and protocols. So we looked at all of those things as well for them. We've got a lot of experience in cold weather deployments and exercises, and we're trying to integrate science into our operations and training as well. And over the last 10 years, we've continued our cold weather training preparedness for when the time comes that we need to deploy into these areas. And I'll emphasize that this training it's not just theory training sat in front of a laptop. This is predominantly practical training. So we're actually getting hands-on experience with the people who are going to be using those tools in those environments, making sure that they are completely aware of actually how dangerous it can be, just the weather, let alone operating any of the equipment. So a lot of the training is practically based. Which brings me on nicely to the our last cold weather training exercise in Norway, where we looked at PPE, site entry, self-rescue, oil detection, its equipment, its use, and then containment and recovery tactics. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the PPE, site entry protocol and self-rescue, and I will pass over to Guy halfway through, and he'll concentrate on oil detection, equipment and containment and recovery. So as you can see on this next slide, the top right-hand corner, this shows the weather conditions we had for the 5 days that we were deployed to the training course. As you can see, the temperatures vary from -2 all the way down to -20, even though when we were there, we were made very much aware that the temperature, you know, it can reach -40 quite a lot of the time. So I think the weather was kind to us being at -20 without the wind chill. So that poses several problems with our PPE. First one of which is just making sure we stay warm. So if you look at the 6 pictures of the lady in the bottom right-hand corner, the normal workwear we would be wearing would be in the orange and black on the right-hand side, just walking around outside, staying warm. Additionally, actually working using the equipment and tools, we need to have that additional PPE, which did pose a lot of problems and a lot of getting used to. So additionally, from that thermal PPE, we've had to wear chainsaw boots, chainsaw over trousers. We had to wear a gauze visor. We had to have specialist safety gloves. We had to have crampons, and all of those things made it a lot more difficult to work in those environments. So it was a really good week in order for us to try and get used just to doing a bit of work and seeing how we reacted to it. If I just show you these couple of pictures here, so the responder bending down the left-hand picture, he's basically got all the equipment you could possibly wear on. So he's got the chainsaw trousers, the chainsaw top, the chainsaw helmet, and he, as you can see, is kind of struggling to bend over to screw an ice screw into an ice block that we've cut out. And then the right-hand picture shows the thermal dry suit that we were wearing when we did our self-rescue into cold water. I'll go into some site entry protocol. What should we be determining before we enter onto the ice? Well, there's quite a few things. What type of ice is it? Is it sea ice or is it freshwater ice? Where's it located? Is it located on a river where there's moving water underneath, or is it near the shore where you've got the tide coming in and out? How high is that tide going up and down? Is the ice broken? How thick is the ice? Is there a variation in the thickness? Are there any other forces that can actually act on that tide, on that ice? Maybe warm water from an outlet from a refinery. Those are all the things that we have to try and ascertain before we venture onto the ice. And as you can see in the photograph in the left-hand corner, we're basically working in teams of 4. We have one person working, and then each person has their own specific safety, who is connected via a safety line to make sure that if that person falls through the ice, that they have somebody there and they are tethered on. We've been using snow blowers to clear the work area. And as you can see in the center picture, we're using a drill and measuring rod to actually work out how thick that ice is. Is the ice thick enough for us to walk onto it? So just going into a bit more detail on ice thickness. If you have a look at the ice blocks in the bottom right-hand corner, what you'll see is those ice blocks are made up of 2 different sorts of ice. You have the clear ice, and you have the snow ice, which is the grey ice that sits on top. The clear ice is formed by the water freezing down from the surface. And the grey ice is formed by snow falling on the surface of that ice and compressing with gravity, forming its own ice layer there. And we have a method of working out exactly estimating how thick the ice should be and what would be appropriate level of weight we can apply to that ice. So a very straightforward calculation. If we have clear ice that is 4 inches and we have snow ice or grey ice that is 4 inches, that's a total of 8 inches. What we work out is its effective thickness is actually only 6 inches thick. In the top right-hand corner, we have a deflection hole. As we've cleared an area that we are going to try and extract the oil from, this is a safety hole that's put in the middle of that area that basically will show us how much deflection there is in the ice by the water being pushed up through it. So what happens is the circles are drawn around the hole, and as that water comes up forming a puddle, you can see how much stress is put on that ice. And then the table to the bottom left basically shows what is acceptable to be used on that ice. So if you're going to stand on the ice, we're saying it's a minimum of 4 inches. And if you're going to drive a truck on it, you're up to 15 inches. So there's quite a difference in that. Self-rescue and life-saving. So this is probably, it was the most entertaining part of the course, but actually probably the most serious part of the course. This is life-saving for yourself personally, and also life-saving of a colleague if in the worst scenario they fall in the water. So we've got a couple of videos here. So if we just look at the top left, this is showing one of our responders who is stationary and he's trying to get himself out of the water. As you can see, it's fairly tricky. He's got no tools to help him, and he really is struggling to get out. He's using all parts of his body. He's kicking his legs. He's clawing at the ice, desperately trying to get out. He also has a thermal dry suit on. So if you imagine falling in without that on, you're going to be in there considerably longer. So that was maybe 30 seconds to get out. If we then move to the next picture on the top right-hand corner, this is somebody getting out the ice with the use of a couple of ice sticks, which are part of the dry suit. So you basically claw you out using those ice sticks. As you can see, that's maybe 5 seconds to get out of the water. So just by having those 2 safety sticks in your dry suit, it's going to help you. And then if you look for the bottom right-hand corner, We're just showing a demonstration of actually getting some forward movement towards getting out, and actually how much easier that is getting out without momentum going forward. So that's also with no tools. And then the bottom left-hand corner is depicting one of our responders falling in the water and maybe becoming unconscious or just too cold to move, where actually we need to have an emergency situation where we put somebody else into the water in order to try and help them. And what we've got there is we've got one responder assisting in the water, and we've got two responders using a sledge that sinks into the water, and with the help of the two people on the ice, they're able to retrieve that casualty safely. So that's an assisted rescue. And I will now pass over to Guy.
Thanks, Graham. So I'm just going to talk about the containment of oil on sea ice. So compared to working on temporary beaches, deploying boom to contain oil and sea ice is very different. Floating ice in the water can damage and destroy the normal air-inflated boom that we use. So rigid boom is obviously the best to use in these conditions. When deploying boom in an area to contain flowing oil, we can use methods to clear the ice away from the rigid boom. The vessel can be used to clear ice with propellers turning circles to create that break in the ice, which will then drag the boom into position, which you can see in the video there in the middle. The image on the right shows us deploying a rigid containment boom on the edge of the sea ice. If you can imagine oil was flowing either over the ice or under the ice, this boom would contain the oil as it flowed out into the water. From here, we can use recovery devices to collect the oil while dodging ice flows. Again, when deploying boom, we have to be aware of the site entry procedures. So as Graham mentioned earlier, we'll still have to drill the holes, check the thickness, make sure it's okay for us to stand on before we anchor the boom on either side for the collection. Other techniques, again, in normal temperature conditions, we can deploy boom on the river surface to direct the flow of oil. As you can see there in the picture, the flow of oil will go to the corner where we have a collection zone, which we'll then use skimmers to collect. However, in ice conditions, deploying boom in the same way is not possible. We have to therefore use other methods of containment and deflection. We can set up a berm made of compacted snow on the ice surface and divert the flow of oil. We can then also use a dry drench to either divert or contain oil as it flows over the ice. When diverting oil, however, there must be a collection device in the final area to recover the oil. And other recovery techniques. So if oil is flowing under the ice, things are similar to when oil is flowing on the river surface, but of course it's hidden. The use of rigid structure like plywood boards can be used in place of rigid or air-filled booms. If the arrows on the image indicate the flow of oil under the ice surface, the ply boards can act to deflect the oil into the area of choosing. Once flowing to an area we choose, a recovery area can be cut out on the ice. This is known, as you can see here, as the hockey stick. As oil hits the area, it rises to the surface of the water and pulls in that large area, which is ringed in red on the right image. As you can see here in the next slide, the skimmer is in the hockey stick at the collection area. With this image as well, as you can see, this day was very snowy conditions, so it made it a lot more hazardous, as the snow would obviously start covering certain areas, which will give you the illusion that it's still frozen. It'll also cover equipment, so hoses, if we've got them laid out, or say shovels, we've got laid them down, they'll quickly be covered in the snow, which then become a trip and hazard. So really got to be a lot more aware of your surroundings in these kind of conditions. And also the red triangle you can see there at the bottom of the picture is a no-go area. So again, things like this, where we've cut the shape of the hockey stick, this has obviously become a very weak point. So this is obviously, we make sure being safety priority that no one goes near this area. Further techniques that we learned whilst we were there. operating on the ice also comes with some benefits. As long as we can divert the oil to where we need it to go, or generally access the oil, we can mount a response operation anywhere on the ice. We can cut holes into the ice to act as areas of enhanced collection, and we can deploy various types of skimmers. So, for example, on the left is what's called a foxtail. We'll dig that trench, and then at the end we'll use a auger to drill a hole. So all the oil that's obviously sat in that pocket will then come into this trench, fill that up, and then that's when we can operate the foxtail to recover the oil. On the right is improvised weir skimmer, which is cut into the ice. So created by cutting a controlled opening into the ice, used a separate oil from water by allowing the lighter oil to flow over a weir into a collection area. A pump and a hose is positioned beneath the ice to direct the oil towards the inlet. Plywood creates the weir system, enabling oil to spill over into the collection zone. This obviously picture on the right is just a demo size, so we can actually make this as big as we need it to be, to depend on what choice of skimmers we use to collect it. So the advantage of this, it's highly portable. We can deploy it anywhere in sufficient ice. It requires minimal equipment, and it is really simply quite quick to set up. Another interesting thing we learnt whilst operating in colder conditions was the use of equipment. So with the chainsaws, obviously, if we place them directly onto the ice, the frozen lake, they will end up freezing to the lake. So we have to use these mats to put down when we're not using them. But even when they are being used in the water, that water quickly freezes onto the chainsaw. And that picture with the helmet, as you can see, our colleague's hand is underneath it, which is not very visible at all. So that quickly covered the helmet when they were operating the chainsaw, which obviously restricted their visibility. So again, it's a lot of stop-start when you're operating, which then the tents on the lower picture to the left, the yellow one there, this was set up just off of the lake in like the car park area, which was there for if anyone does fall in, they can quickly heat up, but also for equipment, laying there. The second tent on the right, we had down on the lake, which is a lot smaller, but this was a lot more useful for operations. So again, putting the chainsaw back in there when we're not using it. So obviously keeping it warm. So if we do need to start it, it's easier to start up and operate. With other equipments we had there as well, we put that in there. So it makes starting a lot easier, because sometimes certain power packs and equipment will struggle to start. So yeah, I'll hand you over now to James, who will go on to the next section.
Nice. Oh, thank you very much, Guy. Yeah, so hopefully this presentation has showcased to you some of the challenges that we can face when mounting a response in Arctic climates, but more importantly, how OSRL is prepared for the Arctic and ready for what comes next. And it's great to see on this slide a little image of the northern lights that we took when we were last up in Norway. But as you can see, working in the Arctic is no longer a future risk. It is an active operational environment. So we aim to focus on future preparedness. And as operations increase in the Arctic, the risk of incidents occurring is also increasing. So preparedness needs to evolve ahead of any emerging threat in the region. That's why we're constantly looking to stay ahead of the game. We have specialist capability, like we've discussed already. As we've showcased, traditional response approaches are not always sufficient in Arctic conditions, and cold weather operations require adapted tactics and decision-making. The specialist training that we undertake in those Arctic environments ensures that we can give credible real-world advice to those who ask for it. And finally, we've proven Arctic experience. So as mentioned previously again, we have years of global preparedness experience across numerous complex Arctic environments. We have a dedicated OSRL cold weather core group, which actively assesses the Arctic for any risks. And we have direct experience from Arctic training with additional oil spill response organizations. So as a result, OSRL is equipped, experienced, and ready to support Arctic responses today and into the future. So, thank you very much. And any questions?
Thank you so much, guys. Please, any of the participants here today, just drop any questions that you have either into the chat or into the Q&A section of this meeting, and I will read it out to our hosts, to our presenters, and they will answer any questions that you might have about what you learned here today or anything that you're curious about when it comes to oil spill response in sub-zero conditions. Just while I give you time for you guys to write on the chat any questions that you have, and please don't be shy. You mentioned now that OSRL has core group dedicated to this. What does this mean? Is this made of responders? What sort of activities do they do? Do they do like exercises? What is it that it means to have a core group dedicated just to the cold weather response?
It's a very good question. So our core group is comprised of responders and people who sit outside of the response department. So in our dispersants group and preparedness group, and these are all people who have operational experience. And essentially the core group is a gathering of these people who will go out and look for opportunities to train in Arctic environments, working and collaborating with other OSROs who might also operate in those regions. So the core group's objective is to try and further the knowledge that we have collectively as an industry, as well as internally, by just being as proactive as possible. Hopefully that answers.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it's really great to hear that there's an entire group of professionals just dedicated to furthering capabilities in that area. We do have one question in the chat, which is, are there any other methods other than using pumps and booms for oil recovery in these conditions?
Just the mouse.
Yeah.
So perhaps I'll take that one. So the methods that we had sort of briefly touched on through there, the foxtail method, which is, if you didn't understand that, it's basically dragging a fluffy piece of rope through a piece of oiled water, and the oilophilia nature of that rope attracts the oil to it. You're therefore able to rotate that line through the water, and it goes through a piece of machinery like a mangle, and it squeezes the oil out of it, and we collect it through that way. So that's not necessarily a pump, that's more of a collection method. So you don't need any pumps in order to retrieve that oil. But what you would need is a method of taking that oil from the ice and moving it back towards the land. And maybe that's a general view on all of these methods of collection and recovery of oil, is that you can collect it and contain it on the ice safely, but actually transporting it from the ice back onto land where it can be recovered and got rid of properly, it is probably going to involve some sort of pumping. Perhaps that just might answer the question for you a little bit better.
Thank you so much, Graham. Yeah, and I appreciate how difficult it is to actually explain in depth what a technique like this looks like. You guys, you were out there having training on this very specific techniques for a whole week, I believe. So to try to condense all of this knowledge into a 1-hour webinar is really challenging. Another question here. Oh, we have a few. In all of your Arctic experiences, what were some of the most difficult roadblocks experienced in terms of personnel safety?
Yeah, I can answer that one. I suppose to say personal safety is the clothes, the safety gear that we put on was certainly, it took a while to get all your safety gear on, obviously making sure your the spikes for your boots as well. And some of the issues we're having with those is that they kept coming off and you might not notice, so then that becomes a very slippery hazard whilst you're on the ice as well. And just generally like maintaining the equipment that you're wearing as well. Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, I'd add to that actually, in that like wearing all the PPE, and we touched on it briefly, but it's something that you don't expect. It's so quick to overheat when you're working, and sweat through the PPE, and then as a result of that, as soon as you stop working, become very cold very quickly because of the chill that your sweat is cooling down. It's very effective. So something to be, yeah, it's always overlooked.
I'd like to add to that. I think that as we are safety conscious on a base case in a temperate climate, we almost seem to step up a gear when it comes to these sort of Arctic conditions. So actually we use the buddy check quite a lot, where we would pair up and make sure that people were looking after their buddy and checking in them and making sure they were okay, as everybody's enthusiastic and they're working hard to make the job move forward. You almost need somebody on your shoulder to say, okay, let's put the chainsaw down, let's let somebody have a go and take 5, go and sit in the warm. So actually people's exuberance will get the better of them, but using that buddy system to sort of pull some people back was certainly a roadblock that we managed to get over using that technique of the buddy system.
Yeah, that's incredibly important. And you did mention it earlier about always having like those groups of 4, very important to work together. Amazing. A few more questions here. So in sub-zero conditions, how does the increased viscosity of the oil affect the recovery rates using a standard weir skimmer? And are there any specific mechanical modifications recommended to these so you can better operate in these temperatures? Quite technical.
No, it's a good question. So I can't give you like a quantifiable answer, but I can say what we've seen. So the recovery rate with a weir skimmer in these regions, it's reduced significantly. It's sometimes completely ineffective. If the oil is heavy enough, dropping a skimmer into oil, I mean, it's essentially dropping it into like a solid. So there's little to no effect of that interfacial tension. So with some skimmers, as you start to draw oil in, it draws more oil in, but that's not always the case. So in terms of modifying it, it might be best to not even use a weir skimmer. I mean, it's far better sometimes to use something that's more mechanical, something with teeth that can actually grab onto the thick, heavy oil. And then, like we did mention previously, you have to use quite a heavy duty pump, alongside sometimes that steam injection to help with an annular flow around the pipe to help maneuver that oil to lubricate it essentially along the pipe. So weir skimmers do lose their effectiveness quite quickly in Arctic conditions.
I think if you imagine the weir skimmer operating in a temperate climate and you have a load of debris surrounding your collection area, that debris often stops that oil from getting to the weir skimmer. And that's very much the same with the Arctic conditions. It's so cold sometimes the water starts to freeze up again and you'll get various blocks of ice floating into the location of your skimmer. Therefore, one of the operational considerations is, can you keep that ice away from your skimmer in order to give the oil the best chance of actually entering it and pumping it away? So that's a consideration, operational consideration as well.
Amazing. Also, still in the equipment section, we have another question here. Earlier, Guy, you mentioned that you could use the tents to keep equipment warm for operations if necessary. We have someone asking if there is a way that the response equipment can be infused with a heater to make it easier to operate and make the response operation easier.
That's a good question. It's nothing that I know of making that response easier, heating up the ice as such. I mean, I'm trying to think, what was that equipment we had that used to attach to a helicopter? That's for an in situ burn, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Essentially, it was like a flamethrower on the end of it. But obviously, we don't use that anymore. But yeah, not that we know of at the moment with equipment infused with heater.
Yeah, to be fair, that would be quite energy consuming as well, probably. Yeah. Just moving on to the last couple questions. We have someone asking if we were dealing with low sulfur oils or biofuels, would there be any greater difficulty due to the different consistency of the substances as compared to traditional oil?
Good question. So if you're asking this, I'm sure you know that low sulfur fuel oils or ultra low sulfur fuel oils act differently compared to regular or standard oils anyway. And when in Arctic environments, because of the viscosity, depending on the density of it, they can sometimes drop into the water column in larger sort of volumes than we are used to. And this can mean they obviously then become harder to track because there's no visual indication of where the oil is moving. They can still be tracked with, modeling, which was stochastic or trajectory modeling, but they can then sometimes just appear out of nowhere weeks later, potentially. So that can be a bit of a problem for those particular types of oil. Hopefully that answers.
Amazing. You touched very lightly on dispersants. Could you talk a little bit more of the considerations that need to be taken into account when using dispersants, specifically if it's in an area where regulatory authority or jurisdiction is unclear?
Yeah, sure. So like any instance where dispersant is being discussed, it should never or will never be sprayed unless specific permission is granted. So in these Arctic regions, you can imagine that because of their highly sensitive nature, it's harder generally to get permission to spray dispersant. In certain countries, that can differ, especially, if force majeure is declared. And then the other considerations can be taken into account, like we discussed previously, where you need to ensure that there are the right environmental conditions to then spray it. So if there is not enough turbidity on the water surface, you aren't going to have that mixing of dispersant and oil, and you won't have oil dropping into the water column and generating smaller droplet sizes. So yes, there is the legislative side to overcome first before you can then take into consideration the environment.
Amazing. There's a question about, does oil spill modeling take into account cold temperatures or ice when doing your modelings?
This is a good question, actually.
I can answer this one. So yes, it does. So with our modelling, you obviously enter the temperature, the sea temperature. So that's one of our things when we're checking or inputting, shall we say, into it is sea temperature. So obviously with modelling, it is all due to obviously guidance. So it all takes effect. I know it was used only last year, actually, Norway region, which they were able to detect an area where it ended up. So the modelling put in there did take that into account, and the way, so depending on the oil as well that you input, obviously acts differently in colder conditions. So it takes all that into account as well. So yeah, it's a very good system that we use.
Amazing. It's really good to know. The questions keep coming, but we don't really have time for any more. So I'm just going to have one last question. It was just a big question now here in the chat is, can we get 100% response and cleanup in the Arctic region? So considering the icy conditions and the oil can hide away anywhere, is it possible to get 100% cleanup?
The long answer is you can never get 100% cleanup anywhere. Depends on the scale of the clean and what it is you're trying to recover. In terms of gross contamination, you can get a significant or almost all of the gross contamination in some instances. And that's non-specific to the Arctic. But the short answer is no, you cannot. But you can always do as much as possible.
I would say, especially if you looked at ice as being your working platform, I would say if you can find it, we can recover it. However, it's the finding it that's the really tricky bit. If you can find it, if you imagine a lake that's 3 kilometers wide, 2 kilometers deep, you're going to struggle to actually map that whole area and try and find all of that oil. So I completely agree with James, is we'd be doing our damnedest to aim for 100%, but the reality is that's probably not going to happen.
Well, I think that just highlights the importance of continuing innovations and training and understanding better these climates so we can keep doing a better and better job at it. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for everyone who asked questions in the chat. We don't have time for any more questions at this time, but you are more than welcome to get in contact with us and drop us an email or a message via our website through the contact forms, and our team will reply to any questions that you have. Also, James, if you move the next slide, if you're interested in finding out more about oil spill response and cold weather, we do have a field guide. I'm just dropping the link in the chat, so you can access that link or the QR code, and via our website you can download our cold weather response field guide, and it gives you a really amazing overview of all the specificities and techniques involved in cold weather response. I think that's it for us today. Thank you so much to our amazing presenters, to our responders. Thank you so much to everyone who participated today. And yeah, I hope to see you all again for the upcoming webinars that we're going to have this year. We're going to continue to touch on really relevant topics and share all the amazing knowledge that we have from our responders and from our technical teams. So yeah, thank you so much, and I hope everyone has the rest of a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.